Betrayal stings deepest when it comes from the one you swore your soul to. Gideon promised Rowena an eternity, but one intoxicating scent of a fragile Omega shattered a decade of loyalty. He tossed her aside, entirely unaware he had just discarded the most terrifying power their kingdom had ever bred. Snow battered the towering stone spires of Castle Harrison, but inside the great hall, the heat of roaring hearths and packed werewolf bodies made the air thick and stifling. Rowena sat at the lower end of the high table, her fingers tracing the rim of her iron goblet. For 10 years she had fought by Gideon's side. She had bled for him in the skirmishes, against the northern rogues, healed his wounds when the kingdom's physicians gave up and stood as his silent anchor, while he climbed the ranks to become the acting alpha of the Highland Fjord Pack. They were betrothed since childhood. They were supposed to complete the mating bond at midnight under the peak of the winter solstice moon. Yet, as the musicians played a lively medieval jig and lords and ladies danced across the flagstones, Gideon's seat beside her remained empty. Rowena's amber eyes scanned the room, picking up the heavy scent of roasted boar, spilled ale, and the sharp tang of pine needles. And then she caught something else. It was a scent so cloying, so overwhelmingly sweet, like crushed lavender and wild honey, that it made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The scent of a pure-blooded Omega in heat. The heavy oak doors of the great hall groaned open. The music faltered. The chatter died in the throats of the hardened warriors. Gideon stepped into the hall. He was a colossal man, built like a fortress, wearing the heavy dire-bear pelts of his station, but it was not his imposing figure that drew the gasps from the court. It was the woman clinging to his arm, Seraphina. She was a vision of fragile, ethereal beauty, dressed in white silks that seemed entirely impractical. For the brutal, medieval winter, her golden hair cascaded down her back like spun sunlight. Her eyes were wide, doe-like, and shimmering with a calculated innocence. But to a wolf's senses, she was a walking beacon of submission and fertility. Omegas were rare, nearly extinct in the modern medieval territories. They were prized, hoarded, and worshipped. Rowena's heart slammed against her ribs. She stood up her chair, scraping harshly against the stone floor. The sound echoed in the suddenly silent room. Gideon's eyes locked onto hers. There was no guilt in his gaze, only a cold, hardened resolve. He guided Seraphina through the parted crowd straight to the high table. Lady Catherine, the pack's elder, watched with pursed lips, her gaze darting between Rowena and the approaching alpha. "Gideon!" Rowena said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her chest. "Where have you been? The ceremony begins in an hour." Gideon stopped just a few feet away. Seraphina pressed closer to him, letting out a soft, frightened whimper, burying her face into his furs. Gideon's arm wrapped possessively around the Omega's waist. The gesture was like a dagger twisting in Rowena's gut. "There will be no ceremony, Rowena," Gideon announced. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that carried to every corner of the great hall. He wanted them to hear. He wanted witnesses. "At least not with you." A collective gasp swept through the nobility. "We have been betrothed for 10 years, Rowena whispered, though her wolf raged beneath her skin, demanding she tear the Omega's throat out. "We fought together. We built this pack's defenses together." "And you have been a loyal soldier," Gideon said, his tone entirely devoid of the warmth he had shared with her just a fortnight ago. "But a soldier does not make an alpha female. A pack needs a mother. A pack needs peace, fertility, and grace. Look at you, Rowena." He gestured dismissively at her scarred hands, her simple leather tunic, and the broad sword strapped to her hip. "You are a beta, a warrior. You are harsh, unyielding, and infertile in the eyes of the moon goddess compared to her. Seraphina is a pure Omega. She will give me strong heirs. She will calm the unrest in the ranks. My wolf has chosen her. Your wolf, Rowena spat, taking a step forward, causing Seraphina to let out another theatrical squeak of terror. Your wolf is blinded by pheromones and lust. You are breaking a sacred vow, Gideon. I am the Alpha. Gideon roared his eyes, flashing a dangerous crimson. The sheer force of his Alpha command sent several lesser wolves to their knees. Rowena gritted her teeth, fighting the overwhelming instinct to submit. Her knees trembled, but she remained standing, glaring into the eyes of the man she loved. I decree our betrothal void, Gideon declared coldly. I choose Seraphina as my mate, my Luna, and the future queen of the Highland Fjord. You are stripped of your rank at the High Table. You will surrender your quarters to the Omega immediately. The humiliation was a physical weight. The whispers erupted around her like venomous snakes. Cast aside for an Omega. She always was too rough for him. Thank the goddess, an Omega will bring prosperity to the harsh winters. Seraphina peeked out from behind Gideon's massive arm. For a fraction of a second, the terrified, innocent facade dropped. The Omega looked Rowena dead in the eye and offered a slow, triumphant, mocking smirk. Rowena didn't scream. She didn't cry. The absolute devastation shattered her heart. But the warrior within her forged the shards into ice. She unbuckled the silver scabbard at her hip, the ceremonial blade Gideon had given her when they were adolescents, and let it clatter loudly onto the stone floor at his boots. You will regret this, Rowena said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. When the winter breaks and the northern rogues come, her sweet scent will not shield your throat. Without waiting for his dismissal, Rowena turned her back on the Alpha, the treacherous Omega, and the whispering court, and walked out into the howling blizzard. 2 weeks passed. The mating ceremony between Gideon and Seraphina was a lavish affair that nearly bankrupted the winter grain stores. Rowena had been banished to the lower tiers of the fortress, forced into the damp, drafty servant quarters, where the scent of mold masked the scent of the ongoing festivities above. She spent her days chopping wood and hauling water alongside the common wolves. The physical labor was nothing to her, but the psychological torment was a heavy cloak. Every day, Seraphina found new ways to parade her victory. The Omega would wander the courtyard, draped in the Alpha's finest furs, flanked by guards purposely dropping her silk handkerchiefs just to watch Rowena's fellow servants scramble to pick them up. But beneath the surface, the pack was rotting. An Omega's scent was designed to pacify, but in a pack of hardened medieval warriors, forced pacification bred lethargy. The border patrols grew lax. The guards spent more time fighting over who got to escort the new Luna than training. Gideon himself was utterly intoxicated, rarely leaving the royal chambers consumed by the Omega's overwhelming biological draw. Rowena watched it all from the shadows, a strange burning sensation beginning to pool in her chest. For days she had felt different. When Gideon had publicly broken their bond, he had severed the magical tether that tied her to him. Most wolves would weaken from a broken bond, but Rowena felt as though a dam had cracked open inside her. One bitterly cold midnight, unable to sleep due to the feverish heat radiating from her own veins, Rowena left the servant quarters. The moon was hidden behind thick, dark clouds. She bypassed the sleeping guards with the stealth of a phantom, wandering down into the forbidden catacombs beneath Castle Harrison. These were the old crypts, the resting place of King Alaric, the legendary first Alpha, who had united the feral tribes centuries ago. It was said Alaric possessed the Lycan command, a power so absolute that it didn't just bend the knee of a wolf, it controlled the very marrow in their bones. The bloodline was thought to have died out 500 years ago. Rowena didn't know why she was drawn here. The heat in her chest pulled her deeper into the darkness, past ancient statues of snarling wolves and forgotten heroes. She reached the central chamber. In the middle of the cavernous room stood the monolithic stone tomb of King Alaric. Resting atop the stone lid was a massive rusted crown forged from black iron and embedded with a single dark crimson stone. As Rowena stepped closer, the fever inside her spiked. Her blood felt like molten lead. She collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. Her bones cracked and shifted, a horrific agony tearing through her muscles. She wasn't shifting into a wolf, this was something entirely different. She reached out a trembling hand, grabbing the edge of the stone tomb to pull herself up. As her skin made contact with the ancient stone, the cavern exploded with blinding light. The crimson stone in the crown ignited like a dying star. "Who comes before the king?" A voice boomed in her mind, ancient, guttural, and shaking the very foundations of the castle. Rowena squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the immense pressure in her skull. "Rowena," she choked out. "A betrayed warrior. A castaway." "I smell no betrayal," the voice echoed, vibrating through the stone into her hands. "I smell the awakening of my blood. The false alpha above plays with pretty toys while the kingdom falls. But you carry the silent storm." Memories that were not hers flashed behind her eyelids. She saw King Alaric leading thousands of massive hulking beasts, lycans, the ancient towering ancestors of modern werewolves. She saw the bloodline passing down through generations in secret hiding in the bodies of supposedly weak betas to protect them from assassination, waiting for the trigger. The trigger was the severing of a false bond. Gideon's rejection hadn't ruined her. It had freed the dormant royal blood from his oppressive lesser alpha aura. "Rise, daughter of the first sire," the spirit of Alaric commanded. "Take the crown. Awaken the beast of old." Rowena forced her eyes open. The pain vanished, replaced by an intoxicating, godlike surge of power. She stood towering taller than she had just moments ago. Her senses expanded 1,000-fold. She could hear the heartbeats of the guards, sleeping 3 floors above. She could smell the fear of the deer miles away in the forest. She reached out and picked up the black iron crown. It didn't feel rusted or heavy anymore. It felt like an extension of her own body. When she turned toward the polished bronze shield, resting against the crypt wall, she stopped. The reflection staring back at her was terrifyingly magnificent. Her previously amber eyes were now a glowing, incandescent gold, the unmistakable legendary mark of the Lycan King. Her canines had elongated, and an aura of pure, crushing dominance radiated from her skin, warping the very air around her. She was no beta. She was a prime Lycan, the only one in existence. Above ground, a sudden mournful howl shattered the night. The warning horn of the watchtower blew violently. The rogues had breached the walls. Because Gideon was too busy burying his face in the neck of his beautiful Omega, the perimeter had fallen. The fortress was under attack. Rowena's golden eyes narrowed. A cruel, predatory smile touched her lips. She set the iron crown atop her head, feeling the ancient magic lock into her skull. Let Gideon see what his Omega's sweet scent could do against an army of savages. And when he failed, let him see the monster he had unleashed. It was time to remind the world who truly owned the throne. Chaos erupted in the upper courtyards of Castle Harrison, tearing through the winter night like a jagged blade. Giant flaming boulders hurled from rogue trebuchets, smashed into the eastern parapets, sending showers of pulverized stone and burning timber raining down upon the panicked inhabitants. For weeks, the Highland Fjord Pack had languished in a hormone-induced stupor, their sharp instincts dulled by the intoxicating sweet lavender scent of their new Omega Luna. Now they were paying the ultimate price. Gideon jolted awake in his royal chambers, the deafening blast of a shattering watchtower violently ripping him from his heavy, dreamless sleep. Beside him, Seraphina shrieked, clutching the velvet bedsheets to her chest. Her normally enchanting scent soured instantly into an acrid stench of pure, unadulterated terror. "What is happening?" she wailed, her doe eyes wide with panic. "Gideon, do something." Grabbing his broadsword, Gideon threw on his heavy pelt and burst out onto the balcony overlooking the main gates. The sight below froze the blood in his veins. The impregnable ironwood gates had been splintered into kindling. Pouring through the breach were hundreds of massive feral wolves, their coats matted with snow and gore. They were the Northern Scourge, a ruthless coalition of exiled rogues, led by a notoriously brutal warlord named Gareth. Gideon's pack was being slaughtered. Without Rowena's meticulous defensive strategies, tactics, she had adapted from the real-life private memoirs of Sir William Marshall, the legendary medieval tactician, the guards were disorganized, running blindly into ambushes. Roaring a battle cry, Gideon leapt from the balcony, shifting mid-air. He hit the cobblestones as a massive, dark-furred wolf, tearing into the nearest rogues with savage desperation. He was the Alpha. His strength was supposed to be unparalleled, yet as he fought, Gideon realized with a sickening jolt of horror that he was sluggish. His reflexes were a fraction of a second too slow. Mating with an Omega had given him peace, but it had stripped away the sharp, paranoid edge of a wartime ruler. He lacked the battle-hardened synergy he once shared with Rowena. Within minutes, Gareth, a gargantuan brute with half his face, covered in jagged burn scars, spotted the Alpha. Gareth wielded a massive battle-axe and possessed the raw, untamed fury of a wolf who had survived entirely on the frozen steppes. "Is this the mighty Gideon?" Gareth bellowed, laughing, as he easily deflected Gideon's frantic strikes. "I expected a fortress, but I found a brothel. Where is your fierce beta? Traded her for a soft bed, I hear." Gareth's axe swung in a deadly arc, catching Gideon in the ribs. The sickening crack of bone echoed over the din of battle. Gideon was thrown backward, crashing through the heavy oak doors of the great hall and skidding across the flagstones, leaving a trail of crimson. He shifted back into his human form, clutching his bleeding side, his breath coming in ragged, bloody gasps. The remaining pack warriors, seeing their Alpha fall, lost their morale. They were backed into the great hall, surrounded by Gareth's snarling, bloodthirsty army. Seraphina, who had fled down the grand staircase, seeking a hiding spot, was caught out in the open. She froze on the bottom step, trembling violently. Gareth stepped over the threshold, his heavy boots crunching on the debris. He wiped the blood from his chin and locked his predatory gaze on the terrified Omega. "Well, well," Gareth sneered, his eyes tracing the delicate curves of her silken nightgown. "The prize of the Highland Fjord, an Omega. Her scent alone is enough to drive a man mad. Come here, little bird." Gideon, spitting blood, tried to push himself up on his elbows. "Don't touch her." He wheezed his voice, lacking any Alpha command. "Seraphina, run." But Seraphina didn't run. Instead, a chilling twist of survival instinct washed over her beautiful features. The innocent, fragile facade melted away, revealing a cold, calculating core. She looked at Gideon, bleeding and broken on the floor, and recognized instantly that he was a lost cause. He could no longer provide the luxury and protection she demanded. Slowly, Seraphina descended the final step. She intentionally released a heavy, concentrated wave of her calming pheromones, aiming them directly at the rogue warlord. She walked past Gideon, not even sparing him a glance, and stopped before Gareth. She dropped to her knees, bowing her head in a perfect display of absolute submission. "I am an Omega," Seraphina said, her voice dripping with honeyed desperation. "I belong to the strongest. If you spare my life, I will be your Luna. I will give you heirs. He forced me to mate with him. I submit to you, Alpha." A collective gasp of horror rippled through the captured pack members. Gideon stared at her, his heart shattering into a million jagged pieces. The betrayal was a physical blow far worse than the axe wound in his side. He had thrown away a decade of unflinching loyalty, discarded a woman who would have fought back to back with him, to the gates of hell, all for an illusion. Seraphina didn't love him. She loved power. And the moment his power faltered, she stepped over his bleeding body to bow to his conqueror. Gareth threw his head back and roared with cruel laughter. "A practical creature, I accept your submission, little bird." He reached down, grabbing a fistful of her golden hair, and turned to look down at Gideon. "Look at your prize, Gideon. Was she worth losing your kingdom?" Gareth raised his battle-axe, preparing to bring it down on Gideon's neck. Gideon closed his eyes, welcoming the darkness, consumed by a bitter, suffocating regret. But the axe never fell. Instead, the ground beneath them began to violently shake. Dust fell from the vaulted ceilings. The heavy iron chandeliers swung wildly, the candles flickering in a sudden icy gust of wind that swept through the great hall. The oppressive, chaotic noise of the siege abruptly died, replaced by a suffocating, terrifying pressure in the air. Every wolf in the room, rogue and pack alike, felt an immediate, agonizing weight press down on their spines. It wasn't the scent of an alpha. It was something infinitely older, darker, and vastly more powerful. It was the scent of the earth, of ancient thunder, of bloodlines forged in the very dawn of creation. From the shadows of the lower catacombs, a figure emerged. Rowena stepped into the flickering light of the great hall, but she was no longer the discarded beta they remembered. She had grown several inches taller, her muscles defined with an otherworldly, statuesque grace. Resting upon her brow was the legendary black iron crown of King Alaric, the crimson jewel, pulsating in time with her heartbeat. But it was her eyes that brought Gareth's army to a dead halt. They were a blazing, incandescent gold, the undeniable mark of the prime Lycan. "What trickery is this?" Gareth growled, though his voice wavered. He let go of Seraphina's hair, taking a step back, as his own wolf whimpered inside his mind, screaming at him to grovel. Rowena didn't shout. She didn't roar. She simply spoke her voice, carrying a supernatural echoing resonance that vibrated in the marrow of every wolf present. "Kneel." The command was absolute. It was not a request. It was a biological mandate. Instantly, the entire room collapsed. Hundreds of rogue warriors hit the stone floor, their knees cracking against the flagstones, their heads bowed so deeply their foreheads pressed into the dirt. The Highland Fjord wolves fell beside them, weeping openly at the sheer majesty of the aura crushing them. Gareth fought it. Veins bulged in his thick neck, blood pouring from his nose as he tried to keep standing. "I am an alpha," he choked out, raising his axe with trembling, agonizingly slow arms. Rowena closed the distance between them in a blur of speed that defied the laws of physics. Before Gareth could swing, she caught the wooden haft of his heavy battle-axe with one bare hand. She didn't even flinch. With a simple twist of her wrist, she shattered the thick oak handle into splinters. She grabbed Gareth by the throat, lifting the 300-pound warlord off the ground with a single arm. The golden fire in her eyes flared. "You are a trespasser in my halls," Rowena whispered coldly. "And I am the king." With a sickening crunch, she crushed his windpipe and tossed his lifeless body aside like a discarded rag. The rogue army remained entirely paralyzed, too terrified to even breathe. Rowena turned slowly, her golden gaze sweeping over the carnage until it landed on Gideon and Seraphina. Seraphina was weeping hysterically on the floor, trying frantically to crawl toward Rowena. "Rowena, my queen, please. I was forced. He made me do it." The Omega sobbed completely, abandoning her previous submission to Gareth. Rowena looked down at the Omega with an expression of profound, icy disgust. "Your scent disgusts me," Rowena said, her voice cutting through the silence like a whip. "You are a parasite, feeding on the strength of others because you possess none of your own. You wanted an Alpha Seraphina. You wanted the highest rank. Seraphina nodded frantically, her golden hair plastered to her tear-stained face. Then I grant you the rank of exile, Rowena declared. You will leave these lands immediately, without a coat, without a coin, and without an escort. Let us see how long your sweet scent protects you in the wild, without a warrior to hide behind. Seraphina screamed, as two of Rowena's now fiercely loyal guards dragged her out of the hall, throwing her out into the merciless winter blizzard, her wails fading into the howling wind. Rowena finally stopped in front of Gideon. He was struggling to his knees, his face pale blood pooling beneath him. He looked up at the woman he had discarded, the woman who now radiated the power of gods. The realization of what he had thrown away hit him with the force of a battering ram. He hadn't just lost a loyal mate. He had blinded himself to the greatest power the werewolf realm had ever known, all for a pretty face. Rowena. Gideon choked out tears of absolute shame streaming down his dirty cheeks. I was a fool. I was blind. Forgive me. Please take me back. We can rule together. I will submit to you. Rowena stared at him. For 10 years she had loved this man. But looking at him now, cowering and broken, all she felt was pity. The bond they once shared was dead, incinerated by his betrayal, and replaced by the immortal fire of the Lycan bloodline. You broke our bond, Gideon. That was the greatest gift you ever gave me, Rowena said, her tone devoid of anger, which only made it more devastating. You freed me from the shadow of a weak man. She reached down, unpinning the Alpha's crest from his heavy fur cloak. I will not kill you, Gideon. That is a mercy you do not deserve. But you are stripped of your title, your lands, and your pride. You will live the rest of your days as an Omega in the servant quarters. You will clean the blood from these floors. You will haul the water and chop the wood just as you forced me to do. And every day you will look up at the throne and remember what you threw away. Gideon broke sobbing openly into the stone floor, his spirit entirely crushed. Rowena turned her back on him, walking gracefully toward the high table. She stepped over the debris, her golden eyes surveying her new kingdom. The rogues, still kneeling, swore their undying fealty to her right then and there. They came seeking blood, but they had found their ancient god. As she sat upon the throne, the black iron crown resting heavily and perfectly upon her head, Rowena knew the medieval werewolf world would never be the same. The era of false alphas playing a game of thrones was over. The prime Lycan had returned, and she ruled alone. What a satisfying end to a tale of betrayal and ultimate vengeance. Rowena proved that true power isn't about manipulation or sweet sense. It's about the untamed strength lying dormant within us, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Do you think Gideon got the punishment he deserved, or was Rowena too merciful? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this epic medieval werewolf drama, hit that like button, share it with your fellow fantasy lovers, and subscribe for more thrilling stories.